Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is episode number 114 of Pop Culturally Deprived, and today we're going to be talking about Some Like It Hot on your, well, Nobody's Perfect podcast. I'm Mandi Kaye.
And I'm Matthew Vose. Before we get into today's show, we wanted to make a quick programming note. We're going to be moving to fortnightly episodes for April and May. You've probably seen, if you've noticed on Twitter, Mandy's got a new job. I'm off on holiday. Life has become a bit busy, so we're going to spread the episodes out for a couple of months. And then we are going to get back into the regular cycle after that.
So our next episode will actually be in 2 weeks on April 9th.
I can't believe you put bi-weekly here.
I know. I was like, I'm not sure what the right word is. And then as soon as you said fortnightly, I was like, that's absolutely the right word.
Because I could say bi-weekly and everyone's going to go, twice a week. Amazing. So many films. Yeah.
No.
Both are correct. Bi-weekly, meaning twice a week and every 2 weeks. Just to make things interesting.
It's one of those words that you always have to clarify what you mean.
Yep.
I mean, we could go to twice a week. You'd get the same programming, or you get more episodes, but with a lot less prep.
Yeah.
It would literally be watch a film, talk about a film.
I don't have enough time to watch that many films. I'm not
true.
like you, where I watch 365 films in a year.
470.
Yes, that's not possible. Only superhumans like you, Matthew, can do that.
People who work at home and don't pay enough attention to the film when they're actually working. Boss,
right.
If you're listening.
All right, as I'm sure you just heard that other lovely voice with us, this week we are joined by Noelle LaCroix of Chipperish Media. She is co-host of Still Pretty, a Buffy the Vampire Slayer podcast, and Orgasm, a podcast about that moment of explosive inspiration when an idea sparks a firestorm in your brain and you just have to talk about it. So welcome to the show, Noelle.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. This is one of my all-time favorite movies, and I cannot wait to gush about it with the two of you.
Oh, I'm so glad. I think we have a lot of listeners who are really excited about this too, because we've had several other Chipperish folks on our show. You know, Lonnie, Kelly, and Joshua have all been here. So we're just going down the list now to get everybody in.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay, Some Like It Hot. When did you first see this, Noelle?
I saw this for the first time probably in my high school film class when I was a sophomore in high school. And then it was part of the syllabus for a college class I took called Screen Comedy, which was hands down my favorite college class ever. So, and I've probably seen this movie 20 or 30 times.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one that I tend to revisit often.
What has kept you coming back over the years?
It's just so delightful. I just smile the whole time I'm watching it. And I keep wondering, is it going to hold up? Is it really as good as I think it is? And then it is. And I'm like delighted all over again.
It is always listed as one of the greatest comedies, a classic, something everyone should see. And I think you're right. It absolutely is on its own merits, and it still is today.
Yeah.
It's fairly fresh in a lot of what it does.
I was kind of shocked, actually, watching it again for this show, how fresh some of the moments feel, or how relevant some of it still feels. I mean, this is a film that's 60 years old. That's I don't know. Like that is it 70 years old at this point? When was this film made? I should know that.
1959.
Yeah. So it's remarkable to me that some of the lines and some of the exchanges between characters as they're figuring out like what's what and how they're going to move through the world is so oddly familiar. I don't know. It's I want to say something about you know, that meaning that we haven't made a lot of progress in terms of appreciating the diversity of experience in the world around us, but we'll get there.
Okay, Mandy, this is your first time visiting the film. So how come you've not seen this before?
Well, anybody who has listened to the show for a long time knows I have frequently disliked old movies, or assumed I disliked old movies. Black and white is not a kind of movie that I've ever really been interested in, except for the first 5 minutes of The Wizard of Oz. So this one really didn't have much going for it to get me to watch it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense to me.
And now this is the second one we've done this year. So, all right. So Some Like It Hot is an American black and white romantic comedy that was directed and produced by Billy Wilder. Released in 1959, it stars Tony Curtis, Jack Lemmon, and Marilyn Monroe. Written by Billy Wilder and I.A.L. Diamond, the screenplay was loosely based on the French film Fanfare of Love, meaning that they wanted to base it on that film, but the script for it was lost, so instead they bought the rights of the screenplay from the German remake of that French film called Fanfares of Love, and then they added the gangster subplot. Because the film broached such taboo topics as homosexuality and cross-dressing, the film did not receive approval from the Motion Picture Approval Code, the set of industry moral guidelines that was applied to most U.S. motion pictures released by major studios from 1930 to 1968. The code spelled out what was acceptable and what was unacceptable content for motion pictures produced for a public audience in the United States. Despite not having this approval, the film opened with critical acclaim and was nominated for 6 Academy Awards: Best Director, Best Actor for Jack Lemmon, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Black and White, Best Art Direction, Black and White, and it won the Oscar for Best Costume Design, Black and White. It has gone on to be considered one of the greatest films of all time and was one of the first 25 movies selected for the National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. That was a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah. Yeah. It makes every list of, top 25 films you need to see before, some arbitrary age or the best screen comedies of all time. And it's on every list ever. So
yeah,
I'm not surprised that there's a lot there.
It always catches me out seeing the Academy Awards split into colour and black and white. And it's still 6-7 years after this, they're still doing the awards as 2 different categories. It was a very long time they split them, and now it's all films go in a pod.
Yeah, I didn't realize they had ever done that, although it makes perfect sense. And so when I was putting this together, I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think the first few times it was in 2 categories, in inverted commas, they gave a special achievement award to films that had been in colour because there were so few.
Right. Yeah.
And then they started doing it as 2 categories, and then eventually they just dropped it back down to 1 again.
It's their award show. They can do what they want.
Exactly. Well, despite this movie having appeared on every best movie list ever made, I had no idea what this movie was about. All I knew was that it had Marilyn Monroe in it. I didn't even know it was Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon when I sat down to watch it. So this movie had an interesting synopsis from IMDb that's actually not super spoilery, so that's the one that I stole this week. When 2 male musicians witness the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago, they flee the state in an all-female band disguised as women, but further complications set in.
Further complications? What could possibly get complicated when you, you dress in drag and disguise yourself and are on the run from the mob? I mean, what complications could possibly happen?
There's no complications there.
No.
I always forget about the gangster subplot.
Really?
It feels, it's a big setup to get them to this place where they're disguised as women,
right,
and meeting Marilyn Monroe. And until watching it this time, looking back on it, I never remembered that bit. It was just they were pretending to be women for reasons.
Yeah, for reasons.
Yeah. So how was everyone able to watch this? Noelle, given you come back to this, I assume you probably own it?
Yes, I do. I own this on DVD.
Nice.
Yep.
And in the States, it is actually on Amazon Prime. I was surprised. There are 2 versions on Amazon. One you have to rent, and one is available with Amazon Prime. I don't know what the difference between the 2 is, but I got to watch the one that was included. So, yay. What about you, Matthew?
And in the UK, it's available on Netflix.
Oh, wow. I cannot remember the last time you have had a movie available on Netflix.
Yeah, I know, right?
It never happens anymore.
I was very surprised. Okay. Big director, big cast for this one. So can you tell me, Mandy, about your experience of Billy Wilder, Marilyn Monroe, Curtis Lemon?
Well, this is my very first Marilyn Monroe movie ever. So, I mean, she's iconic. Everybody knows who she is. But my closest, I guess, Marilyn Monroe was the one that there was a movie I watched in high school where Ashley Judd played Norma Jean and Mira Sorvino played Marilyn Monroe.
What?
Like, that's my experience with Marilyn Monroe.
I never watched that, but I remember that. Yeah.
I think it's called Norma Jean and Marilyn.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, my high school self loved it. And that's my whole experience of really Marilyn Monroe. And of course, there was NBC did a musical television show several years back called Smashed, one of those two, where they were doing a Broadway play about Marilyn. So I know actually zero real information about her. All of my information comes from fictionalized versions of her. It's great.
Nice.
Billy Wilder, I kept thinking when I saw his name, I was like, I know that name. Why do I know that name? And it turns out it's because we just did Sunset Boulevard and he directed that. So yes, I have actually seen something that he's done. Tony Curtis, I only know him by name and because he's Jamie Lee Curtis's dad. And Jack Lemmon, I know because he's one of the grumpy old men.
Yes, he is.
That's it.
If we go on and do a few more of these, there is a very good chance we'll see more of both Wilder and Lemon together. They did a lot of stuff together, so.
Yeah. The Apartment.
Which we almost did instead of Sunset Boulevard. I think that also has a New Year's sequence.
Okay. I would be curious because Jack Lemmon was absolutely delightful in this, and I liked seeing him as a youngin' instead of, I've only ever seen him in his older roles. You know, like Grumpy Old Man and the stuff that he did with Walter Matthau. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting comparing the character here to The Odd Couple, where he plays something very different. So, and much more like The Apartment.
Right.
We always try to talk about your experience of similar material. There is a really good Wikipedia page about cross-dressing in film and TV. But actually, I was trying to find films that are men dressing as women, but not in a Tu Wong Fu, Priscilla Queen of the Desert sort of way. More, you know, going undercover sort of things. And there are a few things like Tootsie, Mrs. Doubtfire, and Charlie's Aunt. Have you seen any of them?
I have seen Mrs. Doubtfire.
Okay.
And I've seen White Chicks.
Oh, God.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
So I went through that same list, the Wikipedia list, and I was like, most of the, like, there are others on the list I've seen. Most of the ones I've seen, though, are ones where women go undercover as men, which is an entirely different thing altogether. Or it was stuff like John Travolta playing the mom in Hairspray, which is a deliberate character choice, not a plot point.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
So from this perspective, I honestly think it is just Mrs. Doubtfire, and oddly enough, White Chicks is the same kind of thing.
Okay. I have not seen White Chicks.
Don't.
Have you seen the big one, Big Mama's House?
I haven't.
Okay.
I don't think. I remember when it came out, and I was going through the list thinking that sounds really familiar, but I don't think I ever saw it.
I just saw that on the list and went, oh yeah, that exists.
Is that the one with Martin in it?
Martin Lawrence, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Nope.
Okay, it's a good and interesting genre, but yeah, really interesting to then see all the different types of cross-dressing that happens in films.
Yeah.
Exactly like you say, you get the Mulans of this world that do a very different story to, well, White Chicks and Mrs. Doubtfire.
I think it's interesting that with Some Like It Hot, Tootsie, and Mrs. Doubtfire, which are the three, I said drag earlier, and I'm not sure it's drag. I'm not sure that's the appropriate word, but where we have men dressing as women for employment purposes, at least in those three examples. And I can't think of I cannot think of a woman dresses as a man story where it's really just about the job and then, shenanigans ensue. I'm drawing a blank.
I think there was one. There was like a Barbara Streisand or someone.
Okay. Now I need to visit this Wikipedia list because... This is it's a fascinating subgenre of usually comedy. I think I love a disguise story or a fish out of water story, and you get both of those with someone, disguising themselves as a different sex. It's always fun.
Yeah. And you're right, it's not a lifestyle thing like going in drag or transvesticism. Transvesticism being a transvestite.
Yeah.
It's a disguise.
Yeah, it's a disguise with this then sort of gender bending element, which of course is a great way to explore any taboo you care to explore, because then we get to, you get to not just be a fish out of water, but you get to be a fish in a totally different landscape that presumably fish should never be in. I don't know. Now I'm doing exactly what the film does and mixing my metaphors and making it super clunky. But
yes, you're barking up the wrong fish.
I am barking up the wrong fish. Love that line so much.
The one that's standing out, if I'm looking at this list trying to find things of women getting into disguise, she's the man. Amanda Bynes dresses as a man to be accepted into Illyria's boys' school soccer team and get revenge on Cornwall, based on the play Twelfth Night. But the rest of them are, there's a film called Connie and Carla, which I've seen and can't remember, so that might tell you everything about it. Two women go on the run after accidentally witnessing a mafia hit and wind up posing as drag queens.
Oh, that's an interesting twist.
Yeah, which adds another layer to it.
Yeah.
There's Shakespeare in Love, where Gwyneth Paltrow dresses up like a man so that she can be a man who plays a woman, so that she can play Juliet in Romeo and Juliet.
True.
Which is a whole, that's like a layer and a layer.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Shakespeare in Love.
Oh, that might need to be a reverse PCD.
That should probably be on the list.
Oh, boy.
That should be on the list.
Oh, it's so good. I love that movie so much.
Okay.
I don't love it, but I'm in a minority there. Everyone I know who has seen it loves it. I don't particularly love it, but I don't know. That probably says something about me and not anything about the film.
I might just have some nostalgia attached to it. I'll have to give that some thought.
Yeah, this is a great genre of films. To move on the conversation, I'm going to ask any listeners, let us know your best. Someone dresses as the another gender for reasons.
Yeah,
films in
and
this,
I want to know the reasons.
Category. Yeah,
I want to know that, why, because the three examples that I'm most familiar with, this one, Tootsie and Mrs. Doubtfire, it's all employment. It's all so that they can get a job that they wouldn't otherwise have gotten. Here in Some Like It Hot, we've got the mob escape subplot as well, but they are looking for work when they go into the talent agent's office. And I can't remember, is it Nellie who kind of tips them off that they're looking for a saxophone, a bass player, and then they go into the office and they're like, you're looking for a saxophone player and a bass player, and he says, you're the wrong shape, goodbye. So
yeah, they have to be young looking and blonde.
Yes.
And women.
Yes.
Which when we get to the band, they don't. I'm sure not all those women were blonde.
No, I don't think so. I also think it's interesting that of all of the women in the band, Tony Curtis is the most brunette. Tony Curtis has the darkest of the dark blonde hair of that whole group.
Mm-hmm.
He's really not, Joe is really not as all in as Jerry is. Or at least that's my reading on that choice of wigs. Because of course, when Jerry dresses up, suddenly Jerry is Daphne and is like stoked to be there and, ready to schmooze with all the girls and talk about seamstresses and corsets. And Joe has to say, come on, we need to be serious here.
Okay. I really want to dig into the identity stuff. I have one question I need to ask first. Mandy, what did you think of this film?
I actually really liked it. It was utterly delightful.
Yeah?
Yeah. There were some moments where I found it, I go back and forth with this thing of, can I just enjoy this, or do I have to sit here with my 2018 mindset and hate all of the misogyny that I see in movies from the 50s and 60s, but then for every moment of eye rolliness, oh, I can't believe they did that, there was an equal moment of, like Noelle said, of this was ahead of its time in so many ways. And it's so good. It's really good. So yeah.
Did it take you with it on the core idea? They witnessed this massacre, they go on the run disguised as women?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like you, the mob storyline wasn't really my focus. Like, it was just what got them where they were, and that's what I cared about. I guess the main thing I kept repeating was, wow, these two boys are really unlucky.
Yeah.
and then, it was just, I cared about the part of the story where they were with the girls and seeing them as girls. Daphne and Josephine were delightful, and I really enjoyed that part. The rest, it was just there to get me to where I wanted to be.
Okay. And I think that's fair. It's an interesting setup, but yeah, it spends a lot more time on identity, Marilyn Monroe, and possibly gender politics. So identity, we were there.
Yeah.
I love the way, exactly like you just said, Noelle, I can't remember which way around they are, but he even says we could be Josephine and Geraldine.
Yeah.
And that's basically rejected. I know I'm Daphne. I'm going to be someone completely different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then they meet and fall for this girl who has herself changed her name and tried to become someone different.
So much. Sugar cane. Yeah, I changed it. It used to be Sugar Kowalczyk. So great. So great. I love it so much. But yeah, it's a nice twist when they're talking to the talent agent, and he says, you have to be under 25. And Jerry says, we could pass for that. You have to be blonde. We could dye our hair, and you have to be girls. We could. And then Joe interrupts and says, no, we couldn't. Whereas up till this point, Joe has been the one with the harebrained schemes, going forward. Joe has been the one who's, we're going to hawk our overcoats and we're going to bet on dog racing when it's February in Chicago. That's insanity, Joe. But then it flips as soon as we have this opportunity to escape. I don't know. I don't know what it is about that moment in the talent agent's office that makes suddenly Jerry's the one with the crazy idea. And Joe is saying, no way, not going to do it. But then, of course, it's Joe ultimately who makes the call and puts on the high-pitched voice and, says, I understand you're looking for a bass player and a saxophone. And I don't know. I love the shift, the sort of back and forth with the two of them, where they clearly have this really established relationship where they know sort of what their roles are within the relationship. But then it's this opportunity that sort of flips Jerry for the first time. And then as they go through, we see, Jerry is just all in, as Daphne. He suggests that they change their names to Josephine and Geraldine. And then when Joe confronts him, he says, well, I never did like the name Geraldine. So he's just in it for I don't know if it's the reinvention or what it is. If Jerry feels empowered by having made this decision when it's usually Joe making a decision and Jerry going along with it. I don't know. I love their relationship so much. I love their weird friendship where it seems like Joe always has some wild idea. And Jerry says, that's nuts. There's no way. and then somehow ends up going along with it anyway.
And once they've actually met Sugar, the interactions between Daphne and Sugar are really interesting, because the whole sequence with her in bed with him, there's a strange uncomfortableness to it. And part of that is because he's in such proximity to her, and secret might be uncovered and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the next day, it really comes across much more like he's enjoying having a woman friend without it having to have overtures of, or you're going to do more with her laddish banter type thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That whole sequence on the train with the party in Daphne's bunk, where, all the girls show up with their,
wine and vermouth.
With their vermouth, yeah. Bourbon vermouth. We could make Manhattans. and crackers in bed. And I love the moment of anyone for salami, and this giant salami just appears in the middle of the frame. So funny. So funny. And of course that's a real freak out moment for Jerry. And of course he ends up pulling the emergency brake, and hilarity ensues. But you're right. After that, it really shifts for Jerry, and they're just girlfriends. In fact, Joe even remarks on it. He says, I saw you on the bus all lovey-dovey, whispering and giggling and borrowing each other's lipstick. He's just, like it's interesting to me that there's this like kind of there's kind of a sexual crush, but also the fun of being a girl having a female friend. It's like a new experience that they both seem to be really into. And there's something just adorable about that.
Yeah. With Jerry, I kind of read that as his initial interactions with Sugar, particularly when they were alone in the bunk together. And like you said, Matthew, there was a little bit of uncomfortableness there. I kind of read that as he was reacting the way he thought a man was supposed to react to her. And then after they were all together and he got to experience the party and just the giggliness and the fun and, like you said, the enjoyment of having just friendship, he was able to move more into that space where he felt more comfortable. And I feel like that is a huge shift in Jerry's personality that continued even towards the end, when you get that scene where he's really excited that Osgood has proposed to him.
Makes me so happy. Every time.
I mean, he's just legitimately happy that this thing is happening to him, and like the shift between that scene and that first scene with him and Sugar just being alone in that bunk is like night and day. And it's pretty great.
Yeah. Jerry really is. We go on such an emotional journey with Jerry over the course of this film. From, being dragged around by Joe to taking on this new identity as Daphne, and then really enjoying it. I mean, I love that. There's so much to be said about that scene where Joe comes back to the room and, Jerry's there still dressed as Daphne and just high on life. Like, it is so delightful with the maracas. And I never know like where the line is for Jerry. Because Jerry's definitely really, really excited, genuinely happy that this has happened. And Joe is trying to make this make sense and says, what are you going to do on your honeymoon? And Jerry says,
we've been discussing that. He wants to go to the Riviera, but I kind of lean towards Niagara Falls.
Completely missing what Joe is really saying, which is, what are you going to do when you have to sleep with this guy? And I'm just fascinated by Jerry's ability to kind of slide in and out of that identity as Daphne, because immediately following that, he says, oh, I know it can't last. we'll get a quick annulment, but 5 seconds ago, he was really, really stoked about this idea of marrying Osgood and being the girl who's engaged. And it's so delightful. Jack Lemmon is so good. There's so many layers to Jerry's transformation, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. And I think some of it is because before he went on that date with Osgood, he really didn't want to because Osgood, was pushy and pinched him on the elevator.
And gross, yeah.
All this other stuff. But when he comes back after he's enjoyed the night with Osgood and having Osgood treat him, we didn't really get to see it, but having Osgood kind of treat him like a princess and this woman that he's really trying to woo, that's when he comes back and you could tell he genuinely enjoyed it.
It's so delightful.
And it is absolutely delightful.
And the fact that it is Marilyn Monroe who has changed her identity to become Sugar Cane. This you mentioned earlier, Norma Jean, who coloured her hair and had plastic surgery and changed her name and was suddenly this fabulous it girl. Mm-hmm. It works because we know the history of that person. And she herself is then an interesting character trying to break her routines, break her habits, do something different than she's done before, but actually ends up with the same old habits and in the same situation.
Yeah, and she's excited about it at the end. I think that's really, really fascinating that she's just delighted to be with Joe, knowing, as soon as she puts it all together and figures out that he's deceived her, she runs straight to him. And I'm fascinated by that, and I don't quite know what to do with it. There's something sort of lovely about it, in that she knows that this can't end well. And he even tells her, you deserve better than the coleslaw in the face and, all of these horrible things that she's endured in her relationships in the past. And she's just smiling at him and says, yeah, keep going. She is choosing to be happy in the moment rather than think of the future and how this could go horribly wrong. And on the one hand, there's something kind of problematic about that, but there's also something, at least for me, really lovely about having the knowledge that this might end horribly and still going for it because right now it's what is making her happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes me back to, so she had that monologue when she was first talking to Josephine about why she's even in this band.
Yes.
Because she's running away from the all-male bands that she's been in. She's got that whole monologue starting with, I'm not very bright, I guess. And she goes through all this things. She can't keep being with the men because she can't afford it because she ends up having to spend all of her money on them. And then they're awful to her and all this other stuff. And I can't figure out if I love or hate that about her because, one, it's so self-aware.
Yeah.
And that's not something that you stereotypically get with female characters from this era, and on the other hand, you've got this whole thread of her believing that she's not very bright, and she repeats that a couple of times throughout the movie. And it makes me kind of grumpy every time she does that. And so I can't decide if I like it or I don't like it. And then it flows into this scene at the end where she's doing what makes her happy. And, she ends up with the guy who they've been setting her up to be with this whole movie. And so it's kind of the happily ever after that you're supposed to get in a romantic comedy. Mm-hmm. But they kind of taint it a little bit because he says to her, but this isn't what you want because I'm a saxophone player.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, I know. And she does it anyway. And so she's doing this thing that we already know hasn't worked out for her. And so it's like, are you choosing this because stereotypically you're supposed to? Or are you choosing this because you are actually trying to make your life better and this is a good decision for you? And the movie skirts that line so closely that it's hard to wrap my brain around what's actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's funny to me that I am rooting for them to be together but I kind of don't know why. Like, it's like, I'm like, this is not going to end well for anybody.
Right.
And
I was sitting there, I was watching the movie and I was like, I don't know how this can possibly end well for anybody. One, I wasn't sure how they were going to get out of the situation they were in. And so then the fact that Spats got killed, of course, made sense. But then they end up witnesses to that murder. So they're still going to have to be on the run again. So, like, how is this ever going to work in the future for any of them? And I love that they just leave it kind of open-ended at the end.
Yeah.
And it's so good, but it still has so many tiny little things that just make you go, what? Why? How? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting to me. I mean, you did Sunset Boulevard, which is also Billy Wilder. And is Double Indemnity on the list? Because that's also Wilder. And that's classic. I mean, that's classic noir. And what's interesting to me about this film kind of up against those two films is it's a lot of the same kind of behavior. You know, people who lie to each other and sneak around and do some, you know, maybe really questionable things. But here, because we're in a comedy, it's funny, and they're allowed to have their happily ever after despite all kind of being scoundrels in their own way. Whereas with Sunset Boulevard and Double Indemnity, you see characters punished for stepping outside of those lines, or for lying or cheating or manipulating. I just think it's an interesting, I don't know, it's an interesting facet of the genre that when, you know, for example, when Joe dresses up as Junior and he trips Sugar on the beach, and they have their whole conversation about, you know, she's here with the band and the music that they're playing. And as soon as he says he doesn't care for jazz, she goes right along with him and tells him that she studied at the Sheboygan Conservatory of Music. And he says, Tony Curtis is wonderful in this moment. He says, good school. Because of course, that's the lie that he told Sweet Sue as they're getting on the train. And so Sugar has picked this up and is going to change in the moment to fit the person that she thinks he wants.
In the same way he's done for her.
Exactly. Exactly. So that moment for me is kind of the proof of concept on the Joe Sugar relationship, that they're a match for each other because they each do for the other what, you know, they try to form themselves to what they think the other person wants. But it really is, I mean, that the ending, it's a wild ending. And of course, Osgood has the fantastic final line, you know, nobody's perfect, which is just, I mean, what else are you going to say to Jerry saying, I'm a man, as he rips his wig off, and Osgood is completely unfazed. Like, what do we even do with that?
But you don't understand, Osgood. I'm a man. Well, nobody's perfect.
Yeah, I love that line. That was going to be one of the things I talked about in my favorites, because God, when they did that line and then it cut to black, I could not stop laughing. It was the absolute best part of this movie, hands down. And then I was reading that wasn't even supposed to be the last line of the movie. It was written as a placeholder because they knew they wanted something amazing. They just weren't sure what it was. And then it was still in there when they did it for a test audience, and the test audience laughed so hard they realized, oh, that really is it. And
it's so great.
It's so good.
It's so fantastic.
God, who played Osgood? Was that Joe E. Brown?
Yes.
I think. He is amazing. Just his facial expressions throughout the whole movie, like he played that character to a T. And like, I don't particularly care for the character of Osgood, particularly the way he was introduced to us with the elevator and everything.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
But the way it ended up with him just deadpanning that and still being okay with it, it made my day.
I feel like that final line, the final joke, it tells you a lot about Osgood potentially. I mean, Marilyn Monroe herself didn't like quite how dumb they made the character. She's like, there was no way you would buy these two men, who are fairly broad and very masculine looking, disguise themselves as women. And that's why the film is black and white, because they could not pass as women well enough.
Yeah.
So if we take it at that face value that actually these men do not look like women, Osgood has seen a man dressed as a woman and still pursued him. With a 2019 mindset, it's really interesting because this was still a time when being homosexual was illegal. Being with another man was absolutely something you could be arrested for. And so he's found someone who's trying to pass as a woman and pursued them with a view to getting engaged and potentially married. It's a really interesting insight into the character. But the way the film plays it, and the way films have played it for many, many years, is this is a gag. It's a goof. It's the security guard in Paddington thinking the Lord from Downton Abbey is actually a woman and is the most attractive woman in the world at that moment. It doesn't matter what they look like. They want to flirt.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it works as a great character moment and a really interesting thing.
And a really interesting twist on Osgood as we, as compared to where he starts out, where he's just the worst. I enjoy his character, but I do not enjoy his character at all. The way that he pinches Daphne and she slaps him, and then he keeps going. And it's just the grossest. And yet, at the end, he's totally fine with it. He's the other side of, Jerry as Daphne, spread out on the bed, saying, I'm engaged, with this giant smile. I don't know what to do with the arc that Osgood takes, and I love it. I love it so much.
Well, let's talk a little bit on the humor then. I can never decide whether the film is trying to do something with gender politics and commentary on the way men treat women and the way that women treat men, in inverted commas, are looking for security because if they have a man, other men leave them alone.
Right.
Or is it doing, hey, corsets are tight, heels are difficult to walk in, don't men look silly dressed as women?
I mean,
what did you two think?
I don't know. Mandy, do you want to go first? I have thoughts, but they're kind of roundabout.
Is that capital T thoughts?
I have thoughts. Yes, I do.
I don't know that the movie set out to make a statement on gender politics, but I think it did. They went out of their way to include lines like,
Look at that, I'm not even pretty.
They don't care, just so long as you're wearing a skirt. It's like waving a red flag in front of a bull.
Yeah.
That's such a moment of, this is how the world really works, and now these men are getting a taste of the other side. And they did that a few times, like intentionally in the movie. Like, they weren't subtle about it, but at the same time, they still had characters like Osgood, and they still had characters like the bellhop.
Oh God, the bellhop.
And so, like, I feel like the movie was made for the world that the movie was made in. It was made for 1959, but because of the situation they put their characters in, they were able to be realistic about it and say, okay, we're going to acknowledge that these two men who have never experienced these things before are going to experience these things because that's what women experience.
Right.
And so it's there, I think, from a 2019 perspective, it's kind of like, it blows your mind a little bit because you've got a line that's awful followed by a line that's so incredibly like woke, and you just don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is why I say, I really feel like a lot of the gender politics, intentional or not, hold up so well. I'm not entirely sure that introduction of the two of them in their disguises is played entirely for laughs. I mean, it's funny, but I don't think it's 100% ha-ha men in dresses, because Jerry is commenting the entire time. I mean, he's complaining. It's so drafty. And how do they walk in these things? And he's sort of incensed on behalf of women. You know, he says, they must be catching cold all the time. And then when Sugar walks by, I mean, we have the lovely, you know, here's our sexy sex symbol, Marilyn Monroe, with the muted trumpet on the soundtrack. And yeah, it's a little bit objectify-y. But then Jerry says,
Look at that. Look how she moves. That's just like Jell-O on springs. Must have some sort of built-in motor or something. I tell you, it's a whole different sex.
And it's right. It toes the line. It's right there between objectification and like genuine curiosity. And that's the piece that I find so fascinating. It's like, yeah, she's sexy and it's fun to watch her walk or whatever. But also, how is this, like, it's like Jerry has a whole new appreciation for women and their bodies and how they function in the world. Am I making any sense at all?
No, absolutely. He's looking at her and like, how on earth can she do that? Because I can't do that wearing the same kind of clothes. You know, it's a moment of admiration and like sincere incredulity.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Which is it's so, you know, fascinating. And then of course we do get to the hotel and, you know, poor Jerry. I just got pinched in the elevator. And of course, the way he delivers that line.
Dirty old man.
What happened?
I just got pinched in the elevator.
It sounds like the elevator is a part of the body, which I just love so much. And Mandy, you brought this up already, but that exchange with Joe that follows is so shockingly contemporary, because Jerry goes and looks in the mirror and says, I'm not even pretty. And Joe says they don't care just so long as you're wearing a skirt. And there's something so matter of fact about that. And so like, this is how the world is. And it's really sobering, I think, for, you know, 1959, but also for 2019.
Yeah, a film like this, you would not necessarily kill the gangsters. They'd have to serve some justice. You'd have to have sadness and then reconciliation between Sugar and Joe. This just skips over a lot of the sort of emotional moments you would do and just gets people together, just deals with the situation. Let's move on to the next scene.
Yeah, for sure. But it's fascinating to me how it's like right on that line of making commentary, but not, you know. And I think that Sugar's self-awareness, you know, I guess I'm not very bright, is part of that. I don't know. So Mandy, this was your first Marilyn Monroe. What was your impression of her, you know, in this film, having, you know, just absorbed from the culture everything that you absorbed? What,
right.
You know.
So there were a few things that went through my head about Marilyn Monroe. First, I was surprised that she's given top billing for this movie. I've always heard this as being a Marilyn Monroe movie. You know, her name comes up first. It turns out she made the most out of any of the cast for doing this movie. But she doesn't even show up in the movie until 25 minutes in. This is very much a Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon movie. They are the stars of this movie, not her. And so that was surprising to me. But watching it and watching her performance, so I didn't read any of the stuff about how terrible it was working with her on this movie and how horribly she did, trying to get through her lines and everything. I didn't know any of that until after I watched it. And so watching it, I was just thinking, she's actually a really good actress. And of course she is. She's iconic, and it's not just because of the way that she looks. She is genuinely talented. Watching the scene at the end where Joe has called her to say goodbye.
Oh, yeah.
Watching the emotions play out on her face of her trying to be strong and okay with it in her voice, but her eyes are full of tears, and you can tell by her body language she's just devastated. She genuinely had a lot of talent as an actress.
Yeah.
And I think I didn't really expect that because I've never seen her before at all. When I think of Marilyn Monroe, I think of Happy Birthday, Mr. President. I think of the white dress. I think that's from Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, maybe?
7
whichever one. But I always think of her as purely a sex symbol and not an actual actress. And this movie shifted that for me.
Yeah, she is really, really very good and much more nuanced than I think certainly than she got credit for at the time. Because people assumed that the dumb blonde, which she played in several of her films, was Marilyn Monroe. People expected her to be that, but she was very bright. And she took acting very seriously. I think that Sugar's self-awareness is informed by Marilyn Monroe's self-awareness that the sex symbol that she was the perfect, post-war ideal of the American girl. So, soft and worshipful of men and naive, especially about her own sexiness, and really offering this kind of sexiness without making any demands. And I think that she does that purposefully. You brought up Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. That's one of my favorite Marilyn Monroe films. And you see it there as well. The real awareness. She says, I think it's in that movie, she has a line about,
I can be smart when it's important, but most men don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
So her dumb blonde persona is in itself kind of a commentary on what is expected of women. But yeah, she gives a great performance in this film.
The only thing that I wish she didn't do, and I think this is just her signature thing, is her voice. Her voice drove me nuts because she does that like baby breathy sound. And I feel fairly certain that wasn't her normal speaking voice, but that's just her thing. Maybe.
I don't know.
Exactly like you said, Noelle, at the time it was the idolized perfect woman in look, in sound, in being ready to fulfill whatever a man wanted. But by this stage, moving into sort of second wave feminism, it was becoming outdated and a thing ridiculed because women were going to the movies, getting jobs, having their own lives more. So it was sort of changing the attitude towards her.
Well, and she was when she was alive, she was very popular with men and not so popular with women. And that shifted after her death, which I think is fascinating. And of course, part of that is the feminist scholars that, really took a look at Marilyn and the kind of femininity that she represented, and how that feeds into, our cultural ideas about sex and sexuality and, what that means for women. I mean, we're coming, with Some Like It Hot, we're coming away from the film noir, femme fatale, sort of sex is dangerous space and moving into a more certainly not sex positive, but there's definitely a kind of safety in the sexuality, I think, that Marilyn Monroe performs, that you wouldn't have seen, 10 or 15 years earlier at the movies.
And yeah, the fact that she died so young, I mean, 36, at what should have been her peak and her prime.
Mm-hmm.
There is a narrative to her life, a sort of beginning, middle and end that allows you to dig into it and really understand her when you look at the details around it, not just what was portrayed through the films, through the media, but understanding, she did work with acting coaches because she wanted to be taken seriously, but no one did. They cast her in these roles and these were the only ones she could get. And she sought out, intellectuals, thinkers of the time, but they were really excited by the fact this really glamorous woman wanted to hang out with them, and so treated her as such. They didn't try to treat her on sort of their terms or on her own terms. Mm-hmm. And then you get into, and she felt so alone, she then became addicted to drink, to drugs, and that ended in an overdose. So you can see all the impact of everything else on what she wanted, and no one let her be that thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just, she part of the reason that she is as iconic as she is that cautionary tale, really about what Hollywood does to women. When you make someone into a star, very, very deliberately, what that does to the person underneath. And I think that's a big part of the fascination with her life, is that was so much of what she experienced in her life was done to her as part of this Hollywood system. I mean, at the time of her death, she was trying to move into different roles, into more serious roles. But the folks around her didn't want that for her.
And going back into this film specifically, you've reminded me, I think Lani's talked about the way a film or the way stories or situations are grown in the environment around them.
Oh, absolutely.
As much as this film is trying to do some sort of gender politics and make comments about the way men and women treat each other and act towards each other, it still dresses her in the way it dresses her and makes her look a certain way, particularly her sort of stage outfits.
Yes.
And the way she has to lounge in the boat at the end.
Yes.
It is just, we've got Marilyn Monroe and we're going to put her on screen in the best you've ever seen her.
Yeah. 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 Her gowns in this film are very deliberately Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah. And skin colored, except for in a few places.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. Very sheer. There's a lot of sheer. That low back on the one dress that she wears, kind of scandalously low, certainly for the time. But yeah, that was, and of course that is her role in that scene, and then the scene that follows where she's on the boat with Junior and seducing him. What did you make of that, Mandy? His whole, "Oh, girls leave me cold" line.
I couldn't quite figure out what he was trying to do. It honestly left me a little bit baffled at least with as long as he let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of made me mad a little bit.
Uh-huh.
It kind of made me want to punch him in the face just a little bit. And then watching her try so hard to be that woman who miraculously cured him of this ailment. It made me sad to see her throwing herself at him like that. I feel like that wasn't a thing. I feel like they did that as a gag. It wasn't trying to be commentary on anything. Yeah. It was just a gag. But through the lens of 2019, it was pretty awful.
Yeah. Well, and of course the gag is, the man is not making any moves. In fact, the gag is the man is not interested in sex, which is that's a whole can of worms about, gender and sexuality and what is expected of people. And then we have it's a weird deception, because of course we, the audience know that Joe is very interested in Sugar and is probably really enjoying this. But then to pretend like, no, it's not doing anything for me is such a, I don't know, it's such a strange thing. And I guess the idea for him is to be, or his idea, I should say, is that he is being not a brute. He's being not the guys that she's been with.
Who, with 8 hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rough, hairy beast with 8 hands. Who he doesn't want her just for sex, and he can prove it because he's not interested in sex. There's something, I don't know. It's that pretending to be the thing you think the other person wants a little bit, but.
Oh, that's interesting. That's not how I read the situation at all, but I like it. I like that better than my read.
Yeah. But I find like there's something, I asked you about it because for me, there's something really uncomfortable about that scene.
Yes.
That I still can't quite put my finger on, even after teasing out all of, what I imagine to be Joe's motivation. That he wants to be the millionaire in glasses who is sweet and gentle and tender and not, objectifying her. But there's something icky about it. I don't know.
Well, okay. So now I'm thinking this through, and with your read on it, I feel better about the scene now, because thinking about it, he didn't start doing that until after he told her that they were alone on the boat. And she kind of has that moment of, oh, I've never been alone with a man before.
In the middle of the night, in the middle of the ocean.
Right, in the middle of the night, yeah. But it's after that moment when she has that slight moment of apprehension that he starts going down that road. And so part of me is now wondering, was that a conscious choice to put her at ease? Like you were kind of saying, like he's trying to show that it's not just about the sex, that he's not this man who's going to take advantage of her, even though by definition, with all of the deception, he is taking advantage of her. But I think the uncomfortableness comes just from the idea of the deception in itself. The situation that he's put them in, they're alone, and he's obviously trying to seduce her, but he's seducing her almost by gaslighting her, by making her think it's her idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think from right now, given, we're in the middle of the Me Too movement and all of that stuff, it feels very icky. And I know that's not what they were going for at all. But looking at it now, I think uncomfortable is just the word, because logically that's not what they're trying to do. They are trying to give us a love story that we can root for. Mm-hmm. I mean, because this is the happily ever after that we get at the end, is these two. But it's tough to watch sometimes.
I think it's, again, for me, it's an evidence of the time it was written. They've already set up that I think she has been with men before. They talk about her in these other bands with the other men and the type that she always goes after. He pretends to be this millionaire, this, Shell Jr.
Yeah.
And it's, what's the end result of that? That's not a long-term deception that you can play off for much, if at all, past that conversation.
Right.
It's only luck that he's got the free boat from Osgood, effectively. So he's doing this because he wants to sleep with her.
Right.
Right.
Like that is the absolute end goal of this. And he just turns it into a negging, playing hard to get type thing. I see I've kissed you so passionately and nothing. And, and she then feels like, well, I've got to keep trying. I've got to turn this man on because,
right.
That is my value, my worth, as has always been proven. And I'm not so bright, and I am not pure. So it's okay for him to do this, I think is probably what they're telling the audience. Like, it's okay. She's been with people before. So it's not like, this is her first time. So it's going to be anything important.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and that is part of Marilyn Monroe's whole sex symbol thing is, she is available for sex, but not in a way that is dangerous. I mean, she's not the femme fatale who's going to sleep with you and then kill you. I love the way she says, I've never been completely alone with a man before in the middle of the night, in the middle of the ocean. Like she has to qualify that statement. So there is that little bit of like nervousness and naivete, and this is my first time, but really it's only her first time in this situation.
Yeah.
So she can be, which enables her to be both innocent and sweet, and also there to fulfill a man's sexual desires. So really, Marilyn Monroe is a fascinating character. And I think that there's a good reason there's like a million biographies of her. But again, I think that brings us back to that self-awareness. And you mentioned it, Matthew, that she understands her worth as a sex object, that being here, being sexy for this man, turning him on, that is why she's here.
Yeah, and if she can't do that, she might as well not be anywhere. That's all she can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of the whole thing with her, the reputation for throwing tantrums and, many, many takes for recording things. Part of that is because she felt she didn't have the value as an actress. She wasn't taken seriously. And when she got to do it, she had bundles of nerves and would burst into tears because she was so afraid of messing up and not performing. And then going to chemical substances to support her through that and deal with her nerves.
Yeah. Which is why that moment when she's depressed after Joe has broken it off over the phone and she comes just staggering into Daphne and Josephine's room and gets the cocktail shaker, the hot water bottle, and she's abject and she says, I'll bring this back when it's empty. And then she goes back to her room, is so heartbreaking because there's a little bit of autobiography in that about, turning to drinking to cope with the heartbreak of the situation that you're in, which, is a real thing. But there's something, when you know about Marilyn and her history, that moment always feels extra painful for me.
Yeah. This is a great film. It works on a lot of levels.
It does.
It does. And we got sort of dark and serious, but it is absolutely one of the funniest films I think I've ever seen, just in terms of how quickly the jokes flow from one to the next. That it's just a constant stream, but it's clever. It's not punchline, punchline, punchline. It's a lot of wordplay. It's a lot of really smart writing. And I think that is also part of the reason why it holds up, is it's really, really well written.
Yeah. So let's lighten it a bit then. Let's talk about some of your favorites in it. Presumably having seen it so often, you know most of it back to front.
I know a lot of it. And I have a lot of favorite lines. I mentioned the wordplay. I absolutely love the mixed metaphors, and just the wordplay, especially between, Joe and Jerry. Jerry says, she called me honey. And then, Joe takes the ladder down from the bunk and says, making sure honey stays in the hive. And of course, we already mentioned pulling your reel, Mr. Fielding, you're barking up the wrong fish. It's just fantastic. And at the end, when the mobsters are in the hotel, and Jerry says, the omelet's about to hit the fan. Joe has said, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. And Jerry looks behind them and there's Spats and his guys. He says the omelet's about to hit the fan. And that it just delights me to no end. I love it. We haven't actually talked much about spats. I think it's interesting that in a story where clothing is such an important element, our villain is also identified by something he wears, his spats. But George Raft plays Spats, and there's a wonderful moment toward the end where he confronts the guy who's flipping a coin in full on gangster fashion. And he says, "Where'd you pick up that cheap trick?" Well, Raft's big break was Howard Hawks' 1932 Scarface. And part of what was notable about that performance was his character is frequently seen flipping a nickel during scenes, and which became an iconic trope in gangster films. So audiences at the time would have recognized George Raft saying to this other actor, "Where'd you pick up that cheap trick?" So a lovely little meta reference for contemporary audiences who would have recognized him as this, he's credited with creating this trope for gangster films. Lots of people have tried to claim that was their idea. But I love little moments like that would have been more visible to audiences at the time.
It's the sort of thing Wilder did all through Sunset Boulevard and some of his other stuff. It's just lovely seeing people sort of doing callbacks and, bringing roles from other films over. It's lovely.
Yeah. I mean, he did the same thing with other characters in this movie too. So he pulled a lot of the gangster extras, I think they were credited as like Spats henchmen or something like that. They had been in other gangster films. So that was just his thing, I guess, is pulling similar characters in to do some of the smaller roles.
So what about you, Mandy? What about favorite moments?
There's so much. It's so good. Oh, we already talked about the last line. It tickled me so much. I really, really like how committed Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon were to this film. I was reading about how in the costume process, when they were kind of designing what the characters were going to look like, they refused to have just regular off-the-rack dresses for their characters because Marilyn Monroe got to have designer dresses. And if they were really going to pull this off, their characters needed to have designer dresses as well. And demanded that the same guy, Ori Carey, who designed all of her dresses, had to do their costumes too.
That's hilarious.
Which apparently paid off because that's how they ended up winning the Oscar.
Oh, but that's hilarious. I love it.
I think it is absolutely hilarious, but I think it's brilliant. It worked. Because some of the lines, you were talking about a little bit of the meta-ness with Spats, but after Jerry had caught Joe being Junior, when they get back to the hotel room, he says,
"What are you trying to do to that poor girl putting on a millionaire act? And where did you get that phony accent? Nobody talks like that."
And it's hilarious. And I didn't pick up on this, but I think audiences at the time would. Tony Curtis was doing an impersonation of Cary Grant for Junior. And so later on, somebody asked Cary Grant how he thought the impression was. And Cary Grant's response was that he doesn't talk like that. And I thought, it was just hilarious down the line, just kind of how it kept going. Little things like that are funny. And it's sad that in 2019, you kind of have to read the anecdotes to get how funny it was at the time.
Yeah.
But audiences in 1959 would have absolutely recognized what he was doing.
Yeah. He's clearly Cary Grant, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. And we haven't actually talked about Jack Lemmon's performance a lot. I know you've touched on it, and he's my favorite. He's so good in this. Oddly enough, I feel like he looks, or I guess Richard kind of looks like Jack Lemmon. I don't know if they're related or not, but I kept watching him in the various stages of this movie, the way that he would say something or the way that his face would just look. I kept thinking, oh, that's Richard Kind, but obviously it's not because it's way long time ago. But his performance was just he was all in. Both the actor was all in, and then the character himself, like Jerry, was all in as Daphne. And just watching that play out was so good.
Hi! I'm the bass fiddle. Just call me Daphne. Hi!
My name is Josephine. Sack.
Hi! Welcome to No Man's Land.
You'll be sorry.
Take off your corsets and spread out.
Oh, well, I don't wear one myself.
Don't you bulge?
Huh? Bulge, me? I'm the most refined seamstress. Comes in just once a month. Oh, my dear, she is so inexpensive.
Come on,
and she
Daphne.
told... Oh, all right.
It is easily my favorite thing about this movie is all of Jack Lemmon. His entire performance in this movie is just delightful. I root so hard for Jerry. I'm with Jerry when he says, you want me to be alone on that boat with that dirty old man. He's just scandalized that Joe is trying to make him, do all of these wild things. But then when Joe says, no, I'm going to be on the boat with Sugar, keep him on the shore, tell him you get seasick, whatever. Then Jerry just goes for it. It's so funny. And Jerry is so into, we talked about it a little bit already, but as soon as they get on the train and all the girls are there, Daphne is fully Daphne. And it is delightful. I love seeing Jerry kind of grab this role and run with it. It's so much fun.
I think
it absolutely is.
Yeah, it's easily my favorite thing as well. Marilyn Monroe is really good. She has a lot of actually very funny moments and she looks fantastic. But yeah, Jack Lemmon is just wonderful at everything he does because he doesn't seem to want to do it, because he's complaining, and then he gets there and he's just into it. Well, fine, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it to 100.
Yes. Yeah.
It's terrific. And it's charming as well because he drops the sort of malice element to it, or the macho thing that he would start out with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
He starts out with this kind of like, sort of lecherous, like, ooh, there's all these, girls in 90s and we're on this train and, it's like, and I think he even says something about, like being a kid in a candy shop. And that disappears so quickly. It's just, shortly after that, he's just like in it for the connection with other people, I guess. And I kind of like what that says about changing your identity as an opportunity to kind of explore yourself and your friendships and your connections with other people. That identity, maybe a new name or a new outfit or a new way of moving through the world can be the thing that really helps you get in touch with who you are and what you want. Jerry is truly stoked on being engaged to Osgood. And it's not just that Osgood is a millionaire and they're going to, get a quick annulment and there's going to be this settlement and lots of money. It's, he obviously had a great time dancing until, the wee hours of the morning. There's something kind of magical about what changing your identity or just putting on a costume, I think, can enable a person to do or feel or explore.
That line when he says, I'm engaged, who's the lucky girl? I am.
Yes.
He's so into it. And it's matched by his delight at getting to put on a swimming costume.
Yes.
When he says, oh, we could get some at the shop. We could get some at the shop.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. So great.
Terrific.
Sorry, I did have one other line I didn't actually write down because I forgot about it until something you said, Noelle, reminded me of it. When we see the first performance of the band and Sweet Sue starts talking to the audience and she says something like, you guys should all know that all of my girls are virtuosos.
Yes.
And I expect them to stay that way.
I intend to keep it that way.
Yes.
And then she winks. It's so great use of the wink. Yeah.
Yeah. That was a great line. It also cracked me up. Matthew, what else did you like about this one?
No, that I think we have covered it in we've dug into this quite a lot. There is just so much to enjoy. And I think on different levels, we've enjoyed the wordplay, the performances, the way they're dressed. And I could see people liking this going, oh, it's a really funny caper. Yeah, that bit where they're running away from the guys with the guns. Brilliant. There's just so many different levels to the humor in this. It's great.
Mm-hmm. All right, then. Well, is there anything else that we need to discuss about Some Like It Hot?
So we've talked a lot about Marilyn here. Are you interested in watching other Marilyn Monroe films?
I actually am after seeing this one. After doing, Sunset Boulevard and doing this one and absolutely loving both of them, I am completely over my black and white aversion. So other black and white movies are great. I know she did a lot of color movies because it was in her contract that her movies had to be in color.
Yes.
So doing older movies in general, I think, is definitely something I need to get caught up on. And, like I said earlier, finding out that she really is genuinely very talented.
Yeah.
Makes me want to see more of what she did.
Yeah. Well, for color, I would definitely suggest Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. It was 1953, directed by Howard Hawks, and it is absolutely delightful. It does a lot of similar plays on the kind of we're sneaking around and deceiving people because we want to marry a rich man, but more than that, there's Jane Russell co-stars with Marilyn Monroe, and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes really turns into this kind of girl friendship love story in the way that I think Some Like It Hot is in many ways a guy friendship love story. And Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is absolutely gorgeous to look at. And it's what gives us Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, which you've certainly seen referenced. I mean, Madonna's Material Girl video is a sort of take on the Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend number from Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
There's a cover of it in, I think, the first or second season of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which is just delightful. Both the music video they do for it, but the song itself as well.
My experience of the song is from Moulin Rouge.
Okay.
That's another good one.
Not Madonna, but Moulin Rouge.
And Noelle, is there anything you would recommend either as a chaser to this film or other films that are your favourites that we should go and check out?
Well, I mentioned Double Indemnity, which is also Billy Wilder, is noir. It was made in 1944, so quite a bit before Some Like It Hot. And I mean, it is the film noir. Like if you're going to watch one, I know you did Sunset Boulevard and that's a good one too. But I absolutely love that. But of course that's really dark and not so much fun and lighthearted. I kept thinking that the movie Ball of Fire, which was made in 1941, was a Billy Wilder film. It was actually directed by Howard Hawks. I looked this up, and Wilder wrote the story. And Ball of Fire is not super well known. It's a screwball comedy. It's Gary Cooper and Barbara Stanwyck, and he plays an English professor, and she plays a showgirl. And it's very much the fish out of water kind of story. No one adopts any disguises, but she does hide out with him for a while and his, I want to say 6 other academics who are working on an encyclopedia. And he he learns slang from her, and it is absolutely delightful. It is so charming. And if you like the sort of people cleverly deceiving each other into a love story, Preston Sturges' The Lady Eve is another screwball comedy, also from 1941, also starring Barbara Stanwyck. I have a little bit of a thing for Barbara Stanwyck. And she is the con artist in that one, and so funny. I mean, she does a kind of the sort of female version, I guess, of Joe's, Shell Oil Jr. millionaire. She plays this upper class lady to seduce this young, naive, Henry Fonda. So it's, The Lady Eve is really, really clever and delightful. And all of those are black and white. So if you feel like dipping your toe into the black and white waters, but I get it. I mean, watching things in black and white, I think is a different, it uses a different part of your viewing, your what am I trying to say? You like film literacy. It's almost like you have to tune into a different aesthetic to really get there sometimes. So yeah, no shame in shying away from black and white movies. Although there's some good ones.
No, I'm really excited now about expanding our list to include some of these movies from the 40s and 50s.
Yeah,
we've shied away from it because I wasn't ready, but I think I am now, and I'm looking forward to it.
That's awesome.
Good times. Is this your era, your sort of go-to, the kind of classic golden era of cinema?
Mine? I love, especially the screwball comedies from the 30s and 40s. Yeah, that is my favorite. The screwball comedy is my favorite permutation of the romantic comedy.
Nice. Oh, and there are a lot of them.
All right. Well, if you would like to join the conversation and tell us about your favorite movies from the 40s and 50s, you can use the hashtag PCDeprived on Twitter. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Eloquent Gushing, or you can send an email to podcast@eloquentgushing.com. You can find us all on Twitter. I'm at Mandi Kaye.
And I'm at Matthew Vose. Noelle, thank you so much for joining us. This was a huge amount of fun. Where are people able to find you?
Thank you. I had a blast. People can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Noelle Aloud. And you can read my thoughts on recovery, self-discovery, and love, if that's your thing, at joycurious.com.
And you can also find Noelle's podcast at chipperish.com.
Yeah, I probably should plug the podcasts. Yeah, Mandi mentioned it at the top of the show, but I do Still Pretty, which is a Buffy the Vampire Slayer podcast with Lonnie Diane Rich. We are spoiler full, so if you are super familiar with Buffy and want to take that deep dive with us, we're having a really good time. I bring my feminist film theory and kind of a directorial eye to Buffy, and we've had some really, really great discussions. And then I also do Orgasm with Dr. Kelly Jones about explosive inspiration.
Yeah, both definitely worth checking out. Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Pop Culture Deprived is completely funded by listeners like you through Patreon. Anything you can give, even $1 a month, it gives you access to exclusive content and helps to support the network and develop new shows. To find out more, go to patreon.com/eloquentgushing, and don't forget to check out all our other shows on our homepage, eloquentgushing.com.
And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Pop Culturally Deprived, where we'll talk about The Fugitive. Until next time, I'm Mandi Kaye.
And I used to sell kisses for the Milk Fund.